All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Express webinar on achieving organizational agility with Scrum at Scale. So as you all probably know by now, this is a bi-weekly short webinar series, 30 minutes or less, and will feature Scrum at Scale experts who share their insights on how to apply the framework in a range of different industries and domains. Today, we are going to be talking about Scrum at Scale implementations, and I'm super excited to have Luiz Quintela on the line to share his insights with us. My name is Jessica Larson. I'm one of the team members on the Scrum at Scale team, and I will be hosting the webinar, moderating questions as we go. So if you do have any questions at any point today, feel free to ask those in the Q&A panel at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Now, as you are probably aware, Scrum at Scale is the natural extension of the Scrum framework. It is Jeff Sutherland's approach to scaling Scrum, dates back to the original, or to Scrum itself. The first Scrum prototype was actually a prototype of Scrum at Scale. So it has, a lot of history and has been used to transform the way that work's being done across many industries and domains. So if you'd like to learn any more about where it's being used or how it's being used, check out our growing case study library. It's available on demand on our website at scrumatscale.com. Many of our trainers, Luis or Q included, are also offering free virtual coaching sessions. So really awesome opportunity to ask specific questions about your context or any challenges you might be facing. If you're interested in checking those out or participating, feel free to find out more information at scrumatscale.com/virtual coaching sessions. Before we get started, just to cover a few housekeeping items briefly, we will only have audio lines for Q and myself so that we can provide the best listening experience. But if you do have questions, as always, please feel free to ask them through the Q&A panel. Or if there's something that you want to share with the rest of the group, you can use the chat feature. We are going to be recording today, so this will be available on demand afterwards from both the Scrum at Scale website as well as our YouTube channel. We will send everybody a link to the recording and the slides by this time tomorrow. And then I also want to mention that attending these webinars or watching the on-demand webinars will earn you SEU credit from the Scrum Alliance, so that's Scrum Education Units. You will need to view 2 webinars for each credit. So they're 1 hour per credit. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Luiz Quintela, who I'm guessing some of you may know by now. Thank you for your time today, Q.
Thank you, Jessica, and welcome, people. I think this is my webinar number 4 or 5. They have been great. Unfortunately, my co-presenter today just had a production emergency. A life Scrum Master never ends, right? We're always trying to fight impediments and all that stuff, so I'll be doing it alone. And like Jessica said, we'll be answering questions later on with the remainder of the time. But if we don't get your question, feel free to come to the online coaching sessions. We have on average for a month, except for July, August, and December that we only do 2. So this is a bit of the things that I learned over the years implementing Scrum and scaling it, some of the pains, some of the good things, some of the bad things, some of the things I would like to share with you guys. I think the first thing we get into this is perceptions. There's a lot of perceptions about Scrum, and not all of them are true. For instance, Scrum doesn't fix anything. It exposes a lot of problems. It's up for you to fix it. It's not for IT. As a matter of fact, I had 2 very successful implementations earlier this year, one in HR and the other one in marketing. Great folks to work with. And is not an excuse for no documentation, no planning, and no nothing. So what I would like to ask you guys is, go to menti.com and enter this code 209592 and tell me what are the biggest challenge that you faced on an Agile transformation. And as you do that, we'll see the results here on the screen. So again, menti.com 209592. And if you would like to put there one word or two words, what was the biggest challenge that you faced? That would be great. And I'll leave it open for about a minute or so, and then we'll come back to the webinar. Should be live now. Great, leadership is not agile, okay. Acceptance, mindset change, why? Great, culture change, remote teams, mindset, perception, culture, people speaking up. That's great, guys. Remote teams seems to be getting a lot of attention in there. Very good. So let's give you guys another 10 seconds or so. I will make sure to include these results when the slide deck goes live on the site sometime next week. Okay, very good. Very, very good. It looks like remote teams is getting a lot of hits. That's very, very good. And acceptance too. Okay, I'll go back to the slide deck, but feel free to keep voting until we have a second poll later on. So what transformation means? In my book, transformation means you have to commit to a full company transformation. It's not about your development department, you are a software shop or whatever department you're trying to do. You have to commit to transform the whole company. Culture follows a structure. So if you don't have a correct structure, the culture never changes. It may appear to, but overall, we all know it doesn't. Mindset, which was one of the things that came into the poll. You have to think differently, especially at the executive level. They have to understand what the role is and what is expected of them. And overall, there's huge mindset change that has to happen, you know, because we want to make decisions to come quickly, validate or pivot out of it, those things that to happen very quickly, and that's what Scrum is all about, is to enable things to happen very, very quickly. Innovation is a key thing. Differentiation, we have to think about this, what makes our product different from other people's products and what we're offering that other people do not. Another thing that's very common in transformations is people think about projects. So there is this project mentality, start, have a middle, and then end, and then they just bundle the teams. That's not very productive. It's better to have a continuous flow of work going to a stable team. Remote or not, it's very important to have a stable team. So executives are key for this thing to succeed. They have to drive innovation. They have to remove organizational obstacles. They have to accelerate the flow to customers. They have to adapt. They have to support. And more important, they have to drive the effort. If you try to do a transformation from what we call the bottom up, starting in one particular department and trying to go up, you may be successful. That's not always true, but you may be successful, but it's going to be very difficult, very long, and very expensive. So ideally, a transformation should come from the top down and not from the bottom up. So there are several organizational misalignments, and it's the organizational structure that normally makes or breaks a successful transformation. One is silos. You have people in development, people in QA, people in ops, and even if they are part of the same team, they report to different people. That's not very efficient, and that creates a lot of communication problems, hierarchy problems, people telling one group what to do and another group to do something different. So that's the first misalignment that has to go away. And it's a very common misalignment, actually. The second one is project multitasking. And I think all of you guys have seen this before. Oh, I work 20% on project A, 50% on project B, and then the other 30% is on the big data project. And everybody in the team has different time allocations for different projects. Instead of having a single backlog they all work on, what they get is a bunch of disconnection things. So I can't do this today because my 20% are gone for the day. So another organization misalignment is team size. I had yesterday a conversation with a client who had 17 people in the same team. And of course, their question is, I don't know why things don't move. I put people there and nothing seems to go. So teams have an ideal size, 3 to 9. Ideally, my experience is about 7 is a good number, 5 to 7, 15, 17, 20. I seen one team with 30 people, was an ops team. That doesn't work, period. Another misalignment, which we just touched briefly before, is you get a bunch of people from different places in the company to make up a team. Then you give them some work to do. The moment they are done with that work, guess what? Okay, we're ship. And you also ship people away from the team. So they break it up. So all the synergy, all the knowledge, all the working together finesse that they develop goes away immediately. Very bad, unfortunately quite common. And the last one is you do your bottom-up transformation and you still have the problem that the rest of the company, the rest of the structure, it's very traditional. They are not in Scrum, they are not Agile at all. So what happens is you have this team, and this is actually from a very good friend of mine, is a very true example. Every 2 weeks, they have stuff going out, perfectly can be put in production. Then the rest of the company is not in Scrum. So what happens is, hey, wait, we have to have 20 people approve this thing, rubber stamp before it goes out. And then begs the question, okay, let's keep the users waiting. I mean, who cares about the users? We have our bureaucracy, right? And then somebody obviously is going to ask, hey, do you think this ships before I retire? Oh, sure, you're only 25, I mean, in 30 years, this will be out. But realistically, in their case, was on average 6 weeks. The best they ever did was 5 weeks because he had to go through all this rubber stamping. They didn't have a concept of DevOps. They didn't have a concept of continuous delivery. They didn't have any of this because all they transformed was the development department and they forgot about the rest. Very common, unfortunately, very counterproductive, very wasteful. So, a true transformation requires several things. The first one is, I'm a big person into product ownership. I did 2 webinars about this, vision. You have to have a clear vision. It's not about implementing Scrum or scaling it. It's about what benefits you want to acquire from implementing Scrum and possibly scaling it if is that the case. Are we trying to cut time to the market? Are we trying to increase quality? Are we trying to be more efficient? Are we trying to eliminate dark work? That's the vision. Scrum is just in there to facilitate it. Your goal is not to implement Scrum. Your goal is to have a business case for implementing Scrum. We sometimes go to an executive and say, well, we need to be agile. We need to do this. We need to implement Scrum, but they don't understand why. What you have to tell them is what the benefits are. Then we have to have a very minimum, and the emphasis on the minimal, bureaucracy. If you don't have structures that align, we get into that 5-6 weeks thing to deliver. God knows when we're going to have stuff on the backlog because they keep changing their minds and all that stuff. Then once you have the vision and the bureaucracy, you have to think about a roadmap. How we're going to do this, what departments come first, who is going to be involved, who is going to do what. Then, of course, you have to have metrics and you have to inspect and adapt how the transformation progresses. And then there is the most important thing is the mindset change. You have to educate people, you have to train people, you have to coach people, you have to mentor people to change the way they think. They have to be less local thinking. I think about my team and start thinking about the system thinking, about the whole company. And that takes time. That doesn't flip a switch overnight. Then, of course, what I mentioned, starting at department level without executives and others involved in the process faces a lot of difficulties and is usually very inefficient. I did 7 transformations so far. Half of them were from the bottom up, and it took forever to acquire progress. A most recent one was from the top down in a particular department, and in 3 months, they have everything run. They had multiple teams scaling with Scrum at scale, and they cut the delivery time for 50%. But there was a lot of support to make that happen. So it's better the top down from the bottom up. The first one took 1.5 years until we finally got the software development department done, and another 1.5 years to get a couple other departments in, and then I end up moving, and they were still doing, I think, 2 years after I left because it was very organic. So I have another poll for you guys. If we are going to target executives first, which of the other groups would you target next? And we're gonna go back to Menti and put the second question up there. Same thing, go to menti.com, 209592, and let's give you guys about 2 minutes to vote. It looks like environment is getting a lot. Okay, we have more, let's go. We have 2 minutes on that one, we're good on time. Product ownership is getting a lot of hits. Let's give you guys a little bit more time. I'll publish this with the slide deck next week. Take a picture. It's interesting to see people's opinions. Great. Well, I like it because I saw product ownership there, and that's a very good answer. So let's go back to the presentation. We'll publish the final results later on. So in my experience, after the executives, I bring HR as early as possible. The reason being, you're gonna have to make structural changes to the company, and HR is part of it. People's titles may need to change. You may need to start hiring Scrum Masters. What's a Scrum Master? We never recruited one. Or you need to make changes to create an effective product ownership organization. That's in my experience. It may change a little bit from case to case. There's no right and wrong in Agile, as you guys know. Second, I would make sure the executives are, and below the executive level, director level, VP level, management level, there are workshops to explain their roles and responsibilities, what they are expected to do. People get very confused when things are new, and they end up doing the wrong things with the best of the intentions. Then I would say, you guys are right on the money, product ownership. It doesn't matter how good your teams are if you don't have a product ownership organization that works, because then you're gonna create stuff really fast that nobody wants to buy. Training without mentoring and coaching, I would tell you, it's a lot of money that gets invested and the results are not the best. Because how many of us came back from 2-day training, go back to work and said, what do I do next? I don't remember exactly what he told me. And on top of that, he didn't mention that one. So that's one thing to consider too. Standardizing environment is key. I once got hired by a company who had 49 different environments. Can you spell problems in production? Because they had by the wazoo. Automation in general is a great investment in CI/CD pipelines, get things out without manual intervention. And some people even tell me, but Q, that doesn't eliminate errors, does it? I said, yeah, it doesn't, but at least it's consistent, right? If you have an automated test, an automated deployment, if there is an error, it's always the same one. You don't get those things that, well, I don't really remember where do I click. Oh, rats, I forgot a step. So automation is great because of that. Dedicated teams, remote teams are a bit of a challenge. There are several ways to deal with that. Unfortunately, that's a little bit out of the scope of the webinar. We can discuss this either in a future webinar or in a coaching session. There are several things that you can do. I've been actually playing with that quite a bit lately. So, transformation tips again. Use the Scrum at Scale minimum viable bureaucracy to synchronize your whole organization. Bear in mind that decision delay kills, and an organization that's very slow to decide on things. And I don't mean on a daily emergency level like my co-presenter is having right now, but just stuff that needs to be decided. Hey, we have this question about this feature and this product. Bear in mind, if it takes 5 or more hours to decide this, the success rate is just about 18%. That's a study from the Standish group from last year. But more than that, you have a bunch of people waiting on the decision. So it's not only the success, it's the waste. And think about a culture of continuous improvement. That's why coaching and mentoring is very important after training. So I usually do this. I create an assessment. Scrum at Scale has a great one. I modified it. I have a bunch of other things that I put in there. Every trainer does a little bit different, but we start an assessment. Then after the assessment, we do a briefing to senior leadership and explain to them what we see and what we think the goal should be. And when you identify the goals, hint, do an impact mapping. I believe I talk quite a bit about impact mapping on one of the product ownership webinars. I do impact maps for everything because you understand the goal, who the actors are, what the impacts are, and what deliverables you have for all of them. If you're not familiar with impact map, let me know. We can do a webinar just about it, okay? Then once you have this, impact maps are for potential work. Doesn't mean it will be done, but it may be done. Then with that, you show how you can use Scrum at Scale to take care of those impacts and goals that you want to achieve. Then usually create a tiny bubble, an agile bubble, scaled or not, depending on your needs. If it's fresh, don't start scaling, do just one team. And then eventually when you see the need of scaling, bring more teams in. Normally 3 to 4 teams, no more. 2 is not large enough. It's very easy to coordinate 2 teams, you know. 3 and 4 introduces just enough complexity that you can work out the details and learn from it. So then you can create your executive team and the product ownership team to get things going. Then as the Agile bubble goes, the product owner team has a backlog, then the teams come online, and then you start working on that backlog, and that serves as a reference model. Then deliver early and often, and keep adding people to the bubble and teams to the bubble. It's a very simple process. There's a lot of inspect and adapt. You're probably going to have to conduct some retrospectives at department level and all these things, more than just a Scrum retrospective, and learn and adapt to what you're doing. So we'll open up for questions now, and I'll ask Jessica to help me out because I never can read that window. So no, Jessica.
Yes, so we've got one person who is working on building a case for leadership for an Agile transformation, and they're wondering what types of things drive that increased cost when we're starting a transformation from the bottom up. So well, how can we translate that into a business case?
I think you can take several metrics. One is how many impediments you found because you didn't have executive support or HR support, or for instance, if the people who do deployment are not part of your development, how many hours, days, or months until you get those things to happen. So there are several metrics that you can document, but usually is the decision delay is the most important one. How much difficulty you are having with your transformation as far as getting things done, getting budgets approved, getting product organization to exist and actually be empowered. I would think about this, think about all the difficulties, document all of them, and bring that as a case to leadership. You have to have data to substantiate stuff. I always say there is, I think, I feel, and I know. The first two are really cute, but it's the I know that actually wins the day.
Great. And any advice on how to handle multitasking or misalignment within the organization?
I think that comes a lot because the structures of the organization are not properly set up. I forgot who always said, I think it was Edward Deming who said, your organization is going to do exactly what it was designed to do. So misalignment, multitasking, which multitasking is actually not a name I like. I prefer to say context switching, because there's no such a thing as multitasking. Our brain cannot. So it's context switching. I think that is because of the organizational design. If you look at the way Scrum at Scale proposes the organization to be aligned, you're going to notice that's very simple, very efficient, and very easy to understand, and more easy to explain to senior leadership why that makes sense.
So if we are doing a top-down transformation, what's the most effective way, or can you give any advice on what the most effective ways to communicate that to the entire part of the organization that's being transformed?
Yes, I done in the past is we did a bunch of webinars first, so people could see what was being done. Then we did a lot of 1 hour, 2 hours, or even 3 hours, depending on the time, classes explaining Scrum, explaining. At the time was not necessarily scaling because it was too early to even think about scaling, but you could conceivably introduce the concept, explaining the organizational changes that are necessary. There are workshops that should be done for leadership in general, not only senior leadership, about roles and responsibilities. You can do some town halls. You can do Zoom online sessions for people to do Q&A. There's a bunch of vehicles. The more information you broadcast, the better. People get scared if they don't understand what's going on and there is no information for them. Jess?
Yes, absolutely. So how important then would you say having an executive buy-in or sponsorship is?
I would say it's fundamental. Can you do stuff without it? Yes. It's going to cost you a lot more money, time, pain, specifically pain. I used to have hair before I did my first transformation. But seriously, guys, it's fundamental. It works a lot easier and it's not as difficult as you think to get their buy-in. You just have to have the proper data. If you don't have data for your company, you can use data for similar companies. We have a bunch of studies in the case studies in the Scrum at Scale site. There are plenty of other case studies. I had a conversation with a client about a month ago. I said, well, Q, stuff's never going to work in mainframe because nobody ever done this in mainframe. I had my laptop, I did a web search, and there was like 140 pages of Scrum in mainframe. So believe me, there is always data you can acquire, even if there is no data for your company.
Absolutely. So I think we have reached the end of our time box. We do have a lot of interest in an impact mapping dedicated webinar and some interest in a webinar dedicated to how to coordinate across remote teams or different geographies. So we'll get those added to the schedule. For SEU credit, once again, I will send that information with the follow-up email tomorrow. So you can submit your credit to the Scrum Alliance. And as always, if you want to learn more, the best way to do so is to attend a Scrum at Scale practitioner class. We offer them all across the world and even virtual courses now. So definitely check those out on the website. And huge thanks to you, Q, for an excellent session and for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. And I promise the impact mapping webinar as soon as possible. Thank you.